Welcome back, friends. This is episode 98 of the Sharp Aligned Healing Podcast. And today we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about COVID long haulers or long-term symptoms of COVID, or I've forgotten, they've slapped another medical term on it, but essentially is if you've experienced COVID in some form or fashion, whether that was the illness or whether that was the vaccine, to be honest, and your health has not returned back to what it was prior to infection or prior to vaccination or boosters, that's getting all grouped into this COVID long-term symptoms. Now, there's a little bit of a distinction because I totally lumped everything together, but there's a little bit distinction on if people haven't had COVID and they had the vaccine, that those can often be vaccine adverse effects, but the mechanism is the same. So that's why I'm lumping them together. Okay. So whether your symptoms are from the vaccine boosters or whether they're from the illness, or could be the combination of folks who've had the vaccine boosters and then got sick with COVID, and then may still be experiencing symptoms. And let me qualify it in terms of if you've been having symptoms for over 3 weeks or over 4 weeks post your infection, those are the folks that I'm talking to today. Because for some folks, right, COVID lasted, usually was 10 to 12 or 10 days to 14 days, up to 3 to 4 weeks, about a month. But if it's over a month and you're still experiencing symptoms, even if it's a year or 2 years later, folks who got infected in February of 2020, some folks are still experiencing symptoms. Okay. Now, those symptoms can kind of run the gamut. Just like at the beginning, COVID, the viral infection, it started as a respiratory infection right at the beginning. Now it's kind of, then for a little while, it was it attacked the digestive tract, right? People had digestive issues, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, body aches, chills, fevers, and then now as we've progressed from December to now, it's a milder form, right? This Omicron is a milder form, a lot of runny nose, people think it's allergies, maybe a mild cold, and maybe just a change of taste and smell. So I forgot where I was going with that, but just as the virus created different symptom profiles when we were sick, those long hauler symptoms can also be very different. All right. So I'm talking about things like the fatigue. The most common ones I hear about are the fatigue, the brain fog, right? The hair loss, things like elevated heart rate, right? Elevated blood pressure. Those are a little bit more, the more common ones. A consistent dry cough. The ones that might be a little bit more obscure, but are still worth noting. Things like rashes on their body that are not going away. I had this in clinic last week, something that's called COVID toes, where they've had discoloration in their feet and toes starting to turn purple. Of course, some of the long-term things like the blood clots, heart attacks, strokes from those blood clots in like deep vein thrombosis in your extremities, to things that when people had COVID pretty intensely, it did lead to some organ damage for some folks, like liver damage, kidney damage, that sort of thing. And so even though that's a spectrum, right? If something mild in the sense of severity, if you will, not necessarily in it's changing our livelihood, but from brain fog to like liver failure are significantly different, right? But it's a spectrum. So so I went down this rabbit hole to try and figure out why we see so many symptoms on this spectrum of people who've had illness or had the vaccine. And I was able to like kind of go down this rabbit hole and find a lot of commonalities and trying to find the mechanism, right? From my perspective as a naturopathic doctor, I'm always trying to find that root cause. I want to know why things are not in that healing and repairing process. Why is our body doing something different than what we expect it to do?
Yeah.
Right. The design of our body, of our immune system, of all the signaling pathways, of those neurotransmitters, those hormones, those immune system, inflammatory cascades, all of those are predictable, right? They're usually predictable. And so when they don't do what we expect them to do, something's off. Right? So so I dug and dug till I found a common denominator. And this is what I want to share with you guys today. So common denominator. So at the very beginning, right, we still know this is still the mechanism on how COVID attaches to our cells, right? Whether it was the original Alpha, Delta, Omicron, if you guys are hearing in the social media, Omicron, B and Omicron C, or like I think it's B1, B2, B3, something like that. Anyway, there are like 3 twins of Omicron that we've gone through, mostly like the Omicron A wave from Christmas to now, and then I guess Omicron B's coming up. But either way, the commonality between this and the vaccine, this is why we're seeing symptoms, is that spike protein. Right. Okay, so we talked about way back when the spike protein attaches to those ACE receptors, right? ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. So we know that they target, that's how they get into our cells. And those ACE receptors, there's a ACE1 and ACE2. We've seen some affinity for the ACE2 a little bit more than the ACE1. But those ACE receptors are all over our body, right? In our brain, in our lungs, in all of our organs, in our blood vessels. And that's kind of why we were getting sort of the whole, what felt like a random spectrum of symptoms. They weren't just like, hey, you know, everybody got the lung, the coughing, the lung disease. That wasn't necessarily the case. Well, that the importance of the ACE2 is that it's not just a receptor, that angiotensin converting enzyme, that angiotensin is responsible for our blood pressure regulation. Okay. That's sort of the biggest mechanism. But the next piece to it, another mechanism or a job that ACE has in our body, is it's supposed to break down these inflammatory factors called bradykinins. Okay. Bradykinins are a I think it's called a peptide hormone, actually, not neuro, a peptide hormone. And so it's naturally also found in most of our cells throughout our body, right? And it gets triggered by injury. It gets triggered by inflammation, and it's kind of the first signaling when inflammation occurs. And so it gets triggered by inflammation, it gets triggered by injury. So for example, what's supposed to happen, you get a cut, right? You cut yourself doing something, you get road rash, right? And if you watch that injury, right, it'll bleed for a little while. When it stops bleeding, it may swell up a little bit. You may start leaking some clear fluid. As that healing process, it might get a little bit tight. When that injury occurred, bradykinin is there on the spot, okay? It creates what they call this vasodilation. So it helps to relax the blood vessels so that we get more flow to that area, because it says, hey, we need to address this wound, right? So then it starts sending out other chemical signals to get the white blood cells to come to this area, to get macrophages to come to this area, you know, our B cells. And then it starts sending signals to grow new tissue, because it says, hey, we've got a gaping wound. So you start to see that leaky clear fluid, right? You start to see a little bit of swelling there. Bradykinin is the first one on the scene. It's kind of like those first responders, right? When you call 911, and whether that's the police or the fire department or EMS, whoever can get there first, you know, then they call it out to, yeah, hey, we need a paramedic, we need, you know, we need transport or whatever. So it's kind of like that's the goal of the bradykinins. Well, those bradykinins should have a very short half-life. They should not last very long. They're the first ones on the scene, and usually that's the first one to degrade, right? Because they just send that signal, they start that cascade, and then they're done. That was their whole job, right? They're very, very short acting. Well, what we're seeing is when that spike protein attaches to that ACE and kind of manipulates that ACE receptor, that ACE's other job was to break down those bradykinins. Mm-hmm. So if our ACE is occupied, if you will, and not able to do its job, then we have a lot of excess bradykinins floating around. Or not floating around, triggered, right, or stimulated. And so the COVID virus, we know it injures the cells, right? So it's creating injury within our body, right? So the more injury, the more bradykinins are showing up to say, hey, we need to do something to address this injury within our cells, within our organ systems. And if ACE is not there, it's not present to degrade the bradykinins, then they're just kind of going unregulated. Okay, so that kind of hopefully sets the scene for us. Well, so what do bradykinins do, right? So I kind of alluded to a little bit. The biggest piece is that increasing what we call that vascular permeability. So it essentially makes your cells and blood vessels leaky. Okay. The trouble with that is that they're not meant to be leaky. Our blood vessels react to our environment. They dilate or they constrict and they dilate in response to things. But usually they're pretty good about keeping the fluids inside of the vessels, right? Usually we're pretty good about keeping the fluids inside our cells, unless there's an outside influence, right? I mean, or if our channels change that don't keep our cells like at that homeostasis level. So when we're having a lot of leakiness, leaky cells, that also means things that cross like our blood-brain barrier, right? Like our blood-brain barrier is technically a closed system. So we're not having a ton of influence of our inflammation and our circulatory system influence our blood-brain barrier or our spinal cord and our nervous system. But if we have a lot of excess bradykinins that have been triggered, they create that vasoactivity so that now you've got leaky channels into the brain. So now you've got, you know, more inflammation in the brain than you did prior, right? That creates that more fatigue, that more brain fog. Folks who look like they have dementia, early signs of dementia when they didn't have before prior to COVID. We're seeing that relationship now. It's also creating vascular permeability in the gut, right? The gut's full of blood vessels. So it's that increased leaky channels in the gut is also creating issues, right? you have to think that it's creating with our heart rate, things like the myocarditis, the elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure. I've seen several people who did not have any blood pressure problems, and when they had COVID, their blood pressure shot up to the 200s. And everybody freaked out because that's stroke level. And so we've been able to bring it back down, but they were stuck on blood pressure medications because it's still more elevated than it was prior to COVID. But we have to think our heart is a muscle, right? But it is also surrounded by a ton of capillary beds, a ton of blood vessels. And if those blood vessels are leaky, it's very hard for our body to manage that volume, if you will. See, so this is where so we get swelling, we get elevated blood pressure. When you trigger the heart muscles, like when you're working out or when you're going for a walk and you're trying to increase your heart rate, like we would want to for better heart health. But then if that creates this demand for more circulation to the heart and those blood vessels are leaky, all of a sudden your heart is inundated with fluid. So then your heart rate jumps up, right? So then we're seeing higher resting heart rates, higher stimulated heart rates, right? So normally our body's very good at regulating volume, right? In our blood vessels, in our blood-brain barrier, in our gut. But when our blood vessels or when our blood vessels and capillaries are leaky, we're asking the body to regulate that volume when it's kind of all over the map, right? Yeah. So we also know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We also know bradykinins increase pain. It stimulates what we call our nociceptors. So like when you get that road rash, right, like it's painful. It increases the release of substance P. And normally that happens because then your body's like, hey, we're in recovery, stop using that body part, right? You need to rest it, ice it. And so it's a protective factor. So we're seeing chronic pain that's coming up post-COVID because of these excess bradykinins circulating throughout our body. We're seeing more inflammation. So there's a relationship between bradykinins and what we call our coagulation pathways, or how our body, how our blood clots. And we have natural regulatory factors that when our blood clots, our body can bring in enzymes to break down that clot. Okay. Right? So we have a balanced system. Bradykinin is on the side of breaking down those clots. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if it's unregulated and if it's running unregulated, it does not have the regular predictive abilities that we expect to break down those clots and stimulate. That's what we call the fibrinolytic side of blood clotting. And so then, if our blood is pooling, if our blood vessels are inflamed and injured, it's going to create those blood clots. And then your body's it can increase prostaglandins as well, which is part of that blood clotting cascade. But prostaglandins are also in the inflammation and pain cascade, right? So we're starting to see all of these different cascades and mechanisms that naturally happen. But the trick is they're normally regulated, right? Like they're normally short-lived. They have either a specific half-life or they have a specific end goal, right? Your body's healed. You don't need those signaling molecules anymore. We don't need those, inflammatory molecules in that area. And then they go back where they're supposed to go and wait till they're, called to another area to respond to. but that end piece isn't happening for a lot of folks. And sometimes it's different because it's a matter of how long that spike protein is circulating throughout our body, and how long those ACE receptors are mobilized so that they can't follow the natural progression of breaking down those excess bradykinins.
So I get with the vaccine and the boosters why you would have kind of a constant state of spike proteins.
Yes.
Yeah. But what about like if you like having COVID, the virus, not being vaccinated, and we're a year out? So are you saying like that human still, their immune system hasn't cleared the spike proteins?
Yeah. So for some folks, their bodies are a little bit slower at like taking out the garbage, right? So they may not be actively sick, right? Like the COVID virus may not be replicating anymore. But you have to think of your immune system kind of after we've talked about the immune system being a lot like soldiers, right? When they come in and they fight off an infection, you're going to have a lot of pieces lying around, right? So they immobilize, they try to neutralize the target with that infection. And it doesn't matter what infection it was, our immune system does the same thing. But afterwards, after those B cells and T cells and all those soldiers have done their job, they're done. And then you've got to call the cleanup crew, right? The things like the macrophages, the cells that come in, they're kind of like, describe them as like garbage trucks. They come in and they have to like break down each individual. So they've got some enzymes in them so they can break down like the spike proteins. They can break down the envelopes, the capsids, right? The mRNA or the DNA that virus brought in, or the bacteria pieces that it brought in. And so for some folks, that cleanup process, it takes longer. If you have a lot of bradykinin that's going unregulated and stimulating all these leaky channels or leaky cells or blood vessels, then you have to think that also your highways, the blood vessels within your body, are congested and broken down. So those macrophages, those cleanup crew can't get to those sites as quickly either.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I wanted to run another scenario. Of course, I have to use myself as the experiment, which I have told the universe I am no longer available.
Yeah.
Experiment. January, I think it was January 21, had COVID. And then, was that right?
Yeah, it was after Christmas.
Was it 21 or 20?
21.
And then I got Omicron in early winter this year, right? So that's another dose of spike protein, right? So even if my body had cleared the spike, then we got Omicron. So now the spike is back in and having to do cleanup again. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So what we are seeing, so even though Omicron is kind of if you see, so I was just watching another podcast this morning. If you guys want to go down this rabbit hole, Dr. Paul Anderson, he's a naturopathic doctor. He's very, very knowledgeable. And he was addressing sort of the panic and fear people are having about Omicron 1A, B2, or because there's 3. You can see, so because, I don't know, they're getting more savvy about COVID, they're doing genotyping. And so they're looking at the genes within the virus of COVID. And you can see on his graph that the COVID alpha, delta, the original, their genetic, or those genotypes or genetic similarities are on the same line. And Omicron 1, 2, and 3 like veers off significantly. And so that's why, because those genes were different enough, why a lot of folks are still getting Omicron. They've got it, this whole winter. This is the thing with the new waves of BA. I'm not going to get the names right, but anyway, the next two that are supposed to be coming up is because their genotype is so different from Omicron, from COVID, original Alpha and Delta, right? Or any of the other COVID variants that may have been in the news, but may not have like swept, across large populations. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we're saying, that's why we've seen so many people get reinfected, who've got infected after vaccination with COVID, is because these variations are, your immune system has created a file to address COVID, right? Anybody who's been sick, even with the vaccination, that was your immune system's job. But because this variant, the genotype is so different than the traditional COVID varieties, varieties, your immune system sees it as a new virus all over again. Yeah. And so that's why people are still getting sick. Now, this is, a quick tangent is that he goes on to say with the other two variants of Omicron that are coming, the BA or the B and I guess the other one might be C, is that just like other viruses, this was even for kind of Delta, viruses are organisms, right? We've talked about this. All organisms, their whole motive and their goal is to stay alive, right? So they're going to find ways to stay alive. So they want to infect hosts, right? Humans, animals, they want to infect a host, but they don't want to kill that host, because if it dies, it cannot create another generation of bugs, of bacteria, viruses, even molds and yeast. And so we're seeing that in Omicron as well, is that with this particular variant, it's becoming less pathogenic, so less deadly, right? Less symptoms, but very virulent or very contagious. Mm-hmm. And the idea, or the, I guess, theories or proposals that have been put out by several virologists, is that because this genotype of this variant is so different than the original COVIDs, it's a little bit closer to the SARS-CoV-1, that this, can increase herd immunity that we've heard about, and potentially move this from a pandemic to an endemic, because then everybody will have some level of exposure of COVID, but potentially this lesser variant, lesser pathogenic or deadly variant. And then we'll see what happens after there, whether, because like the flu is endemic, right? We don't have flu pandemics really, not really since, the Spanish flu in 1918, I don't know if they classified things like H1N1. It never really hit pandemic level status, but so, the idea is the virus will evolve into something that's more endemic and less, and less.
It's going to be more contagious, a lot more milder. It's going to become, I assume, like, oh, we have a runny nose and itchy eyes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So then we're moving into, again, right, optimal wellness and making sure that your immune system is optimal and that we don't have a lot of inflammation in order to prevent things. So the same things we do with like the flu and with cold and, just getting sick in general. Yeah. But so to address these excess bradykinins, okay, so I want to make sure and give you guys some ideas, some tools to take home. So whether
long haulers, so we can just, so people can be clear, like we're going back to long haulers right now, and like all the bradykinins that are creating these long hauler symptoms, which are all right, like bradykinins are creating like elevated heart rate, high blood pressure, comatose, fatigue, brain fog. Like this is the root cause for all of these things. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. This is the most common mechanism that makes sense that I could find.
Yeah.
And that other doctors and researchers are starting to, kind of land on. And so bradykinins are hormones, right? They're peptide hormones that our body needs to break down. And if the ACE receptors aren't able to break them down, what do we need to do to break them down? So the easiest thing I can have folks do is add pineapples to their diet, right? Pineapple juice have a natural enzyme in it called bromaline. You can also find bromaline in supplement form, but increasing pineapple juice 16 to 20 ounces a day, and or half a cup of pineapple, whether it's fresh, frozen, or in a can with juice, not with syrup, can begin to break down those bradykinins. Now, the trick is with enzymes, any kind of enzymes, whether it's bromaline, I'm going to introduce you a couple more. It's better to take them on an empty stomach. Okay. So because our body, again, naturally produces enzymes, usually those enzymes are produced around digestion. So they help to break down our food, because our food also has proteins and fats in it. But since we're trying to break down things that are circulating in our system, in our blood, we kind of want to do that on an empty stomach, so it's not focused in the gut. So doing things, like doing bromaline or pineapple juice before you go to bed, right when you first wake up in the morning. And so at least giving it 20 to 30 minutes away from food, you're going to get your maximum effect.
Okay. I have a question.
Yes.
So in our program, in New Beginnings program, because we test people's adrenals and their neurotransmitters and the hormones, right? And one of the recommendations, I guess for all the humans, not one person has come back with good adrenals. Like everybody has been in either phase 2 or 3. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the recommendations is a cocktail, an adrenal cocktail. So it's orange juice plus salt plus cream of tartar. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Can you just sub out the orange juice? Because really the whole point of orange juice is vitamin C. I know that pineapple juice is high in vitamin C. Can we just sub out the orange juice and do pineapple juice and the salt and cream of tartar?
Yes.
So we're doing 2 things at once. Like we're clearing these bradykinins or helping, but we're also supporting the adrenals.
Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
You can substitute the orange juice for pineapple juice.
Because a lot of times, like I think our clients or me, I know because I'm on that protocol, like I drink that first in the morning before I do any of my other breakfast and supplement stuff.
Yeah. So that's usually 2 ounces, right? 2 ounces once or twice a day. So for the maximum enzyme capacity of bromelain, we're aiming for 16 to 20 ounces. But that's a good way to get in. Yeah. That for
listen to the 2 ounce thing. I'm like 2 ounces, 8 ounces. It's the same. Whatever.
You can always do more, right? But yeah, the original recommendation was 2. But if you do more, that's okay.
Yeah. So just do the 16 to 20 ounces pineapple juice.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So if your COVID long hauler syndrome is a little bit more intense, so that is a good start for folks. Like if you have brain fog or fatigue or the hair loss, the hair changes, right? Things, sort of changes in stress, even elevated heart rate, even the myocarditis, those things will be really beneficial. For folks who have more severe issues, like they've had kidney damage, so now they have diabetes and they didn't have diabetes before COVID, or now they have COVID toes, right? Or now they have their blood pressure is not under control yet, right? Like their blood pressure is still like 160 or higher, or they still have swelling all over their body, right? Like their face is still swollen, right? Their legs are still swollen after COVID. We have to add some more heavy duty enzymes. So the next two I want to introduce to you, one is called nattokinase. It's made from seaweed. So it was originally produced in Japan. That's nattokinase. So nattokinase is from seaweed. And again, you can start that. So that one you usually find in a supplement form, and take it on an empty stomach. And you may have to take it twice a day to help to reduce those symptoms a little bit quicker. And the third sort of heavy hitter enzyme is serrapeptase. It also comes in supplement form. Sometimes the supplement form, it's still serrapeptase, but sometimes they call it serratia. And it is an enzyme produced by silkworms. So when silkworms make their, not nests, but whatever those are called, they're kind of like a cocoon, right? Like their pouches. When the baby silkworms come out of their egg, they secrete an enzyme that helps to break down the webbing of the cocoon so that that silkworm can get out and find leaves to eat. Okay. So it's something that it's not, it's something that they excrete. They have the genes to excrete that enzyme. So companies have figured out how to use that gene to make the serrapeptase so that we can put it in supplement form. And again, it's just another high-powered enzyme to break down those bradykinins, those inflammatory factors that are circulating throughout our blood.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the three enzymes in varying degrees depending on how severe your symptoms are. Okay.
So you already told us on nattokinase. Nattokinase, it was 2 times a day on an empty stomach.
Oh, yes.
Tell us on the serrapeptase.
Serrapeptase is usually a higher concentration. So I usually start people out at 2 as well.
A day.
Yeah. 2 doses. So the doses will depend on whatever the label of the product you purchase, but start with 2 doses a day, again, on an empty stomach.
Okay.
Okay. The next one that can be very helpful is aloe vera.
Okay.
So aloe vera is a very good antioxidant. It's also very healing. It stimulates cellular regeneration. And so when we're talking about our circulation and our cells that are leaky and they have holes in them, we have to reduce what's causing the holes, okay? And then secondly, we have to stimulate the closing or the healing of those holes, right? So aloe is very good at that, at stimulating that cell regeneration from the inside out. So adding aloe vera juice to your diet, again, it's something you take orally. I usually start people at about 2 ounces a day. If you buy aloe vera juice, you want to make sure that the label says the inner pulp or the inner fillet of the aloe vera. The juice is going to be better than any aloe vera capsules. Okay. So if you can do the aloe vera juice, that will help with healing the lining of our gut, healing the lining of our blood vessels. And what else was I going to say? There are some, if they are, well, we'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then polyphenols. So polyphenols are a specific plant constituent that's very anti-inflammatory. These are usually found in like superfoods. You guys have probably heard of them. But things like dark chocolate, red wine, blueberries and spinach, pomegranates, those blue purple foods are very high in those polyphenols. So when they say that they're antioxidants, that means that they help repair damage. Okay, so I mean, antioxidants is a big buzzword in the natural medicine field, but it essentially means that it's repairing damage. So the more foods that you can get in that are high in antioxidants, high in polyphenols, you're repairing that damage quicker.
Okay, because I know the humans.
Yeah.
You probably should be pretty clear on this dark chocolate and wine thing. People are going to be like, oh, I will have dark chocolate for every meal.
Okay, true. So
like what, like how, what percent, how much?
Okay, so when I say dark chocolate, I mean, thank you for asking that question. So when I say dark chocolate, I'm meaning anything that has 60 to 70% cacao or higher.
Okay.
So if you're not a dark chocolate fan, cacao, carob, cacao nibs, because those don't have sugar in them, right? Or if you're doing a bar of chocolate, 70 or higher is the preferred. That's where you're getting the most antioxidants in of your dark chocolate. Now, as far as a serving, we're usually talking about an ounce, maybe 2 times a day, not a lot. Now, if you're doing, I found a good way to add the chocolate antioxidants to your diet without being tempted by the sugar in the chocolate bars is if you take cocoa powder, right? Just like cocoa powder that it's in the baking aisle. Okay. They do have dark chocolate cocoa powder or like they have regular cocoa powder. It doesn't have any sugar in it. It's just straight up cocoa powder. That is what you can add 1 to 2 tablespoons in your hot beverage, in your coffee.
All the humans are so sad in this moment right now.
I'm sorry. Let me clarify. Yeah, it's not the chocolate. We've been brainwashed that chocolate should have a certain taste, but we're not taking the chocolate in for the taste. We're taking it in for the antioxidants and the ability to repair things quickly.
Yeah, and there is in Walmart. There's like a tiny little like health food section, right? Mm-hmm. And they have cacao powder there.
Yes. Yeah. You can make, so I haven't done this in a while because I tried to get off, well, I don't know. It's not hard, but you can make your own like truffles or like chocolate balls, like chocolate things. And it's cacao powder or dark chocolate cocoa powder, a 1-to-1 ratio with coconut oil. And then you can add a little bit of maple syrup. I used to tell people maple syrup to taste, and then they would just like drown it in maple syrup. And then you mix it all together, put it in balls, put it in the fridge or the freezer, and it'll harden up, right? And you make like little treats out of it. Or I'd put them in muffin, those like little bitty small snack size muffin thing papers, and you could put like some almond butter on it and make your own like, healthier almond butter cup. But when I asked people to do it with like only a tablespoon of maple syrup, everybody would turn their nose up at it and be like, oh, that's too much work for what it tastes. So
yeah, it does not taste delicious.
No, we're trying to get it in for the benefits. Yeah. For the antioxidant benefits. And as far as red wine goes, same. The red wine, we're only doing about 4 ounces a day. So that's a half a cup. Yeah, a whole cup is 8 ounces. So if you do 2 ounces twice a day, you're getting it in for those polyphenols. And you want red wine, not blush or white. Yeah. So
I thought we should clarify on that.
That's probably a good idea. That's probably a good idea.
Hershey bars. Like, I got my chocolate. I just eat a Hershey bars a day.
Yeah, that's not quite what we're going for. Perfect. That's what I wanted to make sure and share with you guys. If you have specific questions or if you're struggling with COVID long haulers, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know that, a lot of practitioners don't have a ton of resources for folks who are experiencing long-term symptoms for COVID. And so I'd be happy to try and help if that's you. So.
Okay, so I want to just make sure that the humans that have brains like mine that are not medically trained understand. So the reason some of us have these long hauler symptoms is because of bradykinins, which are causing basically, in my words, like leaky blood vessels, kind of like leaky gut. It's just allowing substances out of my veins into the rest of my body. Like, it's like they're punching holes in my veins. Okay.
Yes.
Which is adding more volume of blood and liquid and stuff into my body, causing my blood pressure perhaps to be high, or it's harder on my heart because there's more volume it's having to deal with. And people are having that inflammation and swelling and etc. And it's crossing the blood-brain barrier, which can also cause brain fog, all these other things, right?
Yes. Yep. Memory problems, brain fog, even headaches.
Yeah.
Migraines. Yes.
Hair loss. Okay. So we need to support the immune system, always, for the rest of your life, every day, for the rest of your life. Support the immune system. But to start doing pineapple juice, because that's going to help start breaking down the bradykinins, the hole punchers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Get rid of those guys.
Yes.
And if you're really severe, like you've had organ damage, you need to go more a little advanced to the nattokinase.
Yeah. Nattokinase
And the serrapeptase.
Yes.
Okay. And then for the rest of us, again, all of us, so we've got the hole punchers dealing with those guys. We need to start dealing with the holes that have been punched and help healing those. And that is aloe vera juice and polyphenols to help our body start healing those holes.
Exactly. You got to repair the damage. Yeah. Whether that damage is in our brain, in our heart, in other organs, in our blood vessels, it doesn't matter. It's still, the repairing process is going to be the same, but we're stimulating the repairing process by increasing the aloe and the polyphenols circulating in our system.
Okay. So my question is then, how, like, we just do this until we finally feel better again, feel back to our normal selves, or like, what is this going to look like? Yeah. I mean, I guess in theory, I won't get Omicron again because I've already had it. Whether it's B or A, or they're not, doesn't make sense naming system.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't be exposed in theory to more spike proteins because I've already had alpha, then I had Omicron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so that's a great question. But unfortunately it's one that I don't have a great answer for. Okay. So our best gauge is going to be your change in symptoms. Yeah. Because right now we can't, they can test for the antibodies, right? They can test for the antibodies to see if you have antibodies present. They can test for the active spike protein, right? Like if you're infected or not, if there's an active infection going on. We can't really, there's not an easy test to test for if there are like, lingering pieces, or, like if your garbage truck a crew hasn't come through and been able to pick things up. We can't really test for that easily.
Can they my bradykinase levels?
Well, not very easily either. There isn't really a specific test. Now, sometimes you can test for inflammation. You're looking at like the ESR, the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, or like the CRP. So you can test that. Like a lot of folks, docs were testing ESR rates, or that sedimentation rate, to get an idea of what people's level of inflammation is, because bradykinin, like creates that, or starts that path, cascade. And so we can look at it that way. But there's not really a way to just like kind of test bradykinins, because one, they're all over our body. But two, when they're creating these leakiness throughout our blood vessels and our cells, it's just not easy to target, I guess. Yeah. So usually, they're looking at other factors when they're trying to measure bradykinin, and so that's why it's not easy to follow up with. Yeah. So your symptoms change is going to be your best gauge, and unfortunately. So that makes a good point, though. Encouraging folks to keep a symptom journal, because sometimes they don't notice changes right away when they're doing things to reduce inflammation, and so consider doing a symptom journal to help kind of keep that of like, hey, are things changing? And that can help determine how intense you need to do your therapy, right? Like if you need to increase polyphenols and do a higher or more potent enzyme, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yes. Cool. Super interesting.
I hope so. I hope that makes sense. It was really interesting when I was doing the research and trying to figure out, ways to help folks that are, more and more, I'm seeing more and more folks who are coming in with long haulers. And again, those symptoms are on the whole spectrum, right? And it's like, okay, what's the disconnect? And so it's very interesting to me as well.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, Dr. Carmen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, guys, I'll include the best I can, all the stuff in the show notes. I'll include Dr. Carmen's email at info@drcarmenjones.com. I would just ask that you guys, and this is not Carmen, this is Kim. I would ask that you be considerate of Dr. Carmen, right? She is going to be inundated with emails. So if she does not respond to you and your preset 5-minute idea, like, it's okay, right? It may take 24, 48, 7 days. She'll get to you. It's just, there's going to be so much. And also I would encourage you, my tangent, we are both small businesses, right? So if you want small businesses to survive, maybe you don't send an email, maybe you make a virtual appointment. Option 2. All right, guys, thank you and have a great day. We'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.